The most dangerous enemies don't come angry, they don't come loud, they don't warn you, they smile, they listen, they stand close. And if you've ever trusted someone who felt safe, only to later feel exposed, weakened, or quietly undermined, this is why. Some people don't oppose you openly because their power depends on your comfort. And once you see how smiling enemies operate, you'll never confuse friendliness with loyalty again. Some dangers don't announce themselves with anger, threats, or open hostility. They arrive smiling. They shake your hand. They listen closely. They make you feel safe. And that is exactly why they are the most dangerous. If you've ever trusted someone who seemed supportive, only to later feel exposed, weakened, or quietly undermined, this is not coincidence. The most dangerous enemies do not confront you. They observe you. They don't rush to attack. They wait. And once you understand why those who smile at you can pose the greatest threat, you will never confuse friendliness with loyalty again. A smiling enemy survives by blending in. Open opposition would alert you too quickly. Suspicion would rise. Boundaries would form. So instead, they offer warmth. They mirror your language. They show interest in your life. Their smile is not kindness. It is camouflage. It allows them to remain close enough to gather information, understand your patterns, and position themselves advantageously. Their friendliness is not meant to build trust for connection. It is meant to lower your defenses. What makes this type of enemy so dangerous is their patience. They are rarely impulsive. They watch how you react to praise, how you respond under pressure, what makes you hesitate, and where you feel most confident. They smile while collecting details others overlook. And because they never appear threatening, their access is uninterrupted. You speak freely, you share plans, you reveal vulnerabilities, all while believing you are safe. Smiling enemies often struggle internally with comparison. Something about you unsettles them, your growth, your peace, your influence, or your direction. But instead of confronting that discomfort, they mask it. The smile becomes a way to deny their resentment even to themselves. By appearing supportive, they maintain proximity without having to confront the envy or insecurity driving them. This internal conflict makes them unpredictable because what they show and what they feel are never aligned. Another reason smiling enemies are dangerous is that they rarely act alone. Their influence spreads quietly. They listen carefully so they can repeat selectively. They frame conversations in ways that benefit them while maintaining plausible innocence. If questioned, they can always say, "I was just trying to help," or "I meant well." The smile becomes their shield, protecting them from accountability while allowing harm to unfold subtly. Perhaps the most unsettling truth is that smiling enemies often believe they are justified. They don't see themselves as villains. They see themselves as balancing the scales, protecting their position, or responding to a threat they feel but cannot name. This self-justification makes them persistent. They don't rush, they don't retreat easily. And because their actions are wrapped in politeness, they are rarely confronted until damage has already been done. One of the clearest signs of a smiling enemy is inconsistency between words and timing. They congratulate you, but only after others have already noticed your success. They support you verbally, but their actions lag behind. This delay is not accidental. It allows them to appear aligned without fully committing. Their smile buys them time to adjust emotionally, time to reposition themselves, and time to decide how your progress affects their interests. Smiling enemies are skilled at asking the right questions. They sound curious, concerned, or invested, but their questions often probe for weaknesses rather than understanding. They want to know where you downweigh yourself, what worries you, and what you fear losing. This information is rarely used immediately. It is stored, and when circumstances shift, those details become leverage, subtle, indirect, and difficult to trace back to the source. Another revealing behavior is selective encouragement. They cheer you on when your goals feel distant or uncertain, but their enthusiasm fades as you gain momentum. When success becomes real, measurable, and visible, the smile tightens. Compliments become shorter. Conversations redirect. This shift happens because your progress moves from abstract possibility to tangible reality, and reality forces comparison they can no longer avoid. Smiling enemies also excel at neutrality during critical moments. When you need clear support, they remain vague. When clarity would protect you, they stay silent. This neutrality allows them to claim innocence later, while quietly benefiting from outcomes that don't favor you. Their smile remains intact because they never openly opposed you, yet they never stood with you either. There is often an emotional imbalance in these relationships. You feel compelled to explain yourself more around them. You soften your excitement. You downplay wins. This is not coincidence. A smiling enemy unconsciously trains you to manage their comfort, even while they manage their own agenda. Over time, this dynamic drains confidence and creates confusion, making it harder for you to trust your instincts. Smiling enemies often remain close because proximity gives them power. Distance would limit their influence, but closeness allows observation, access, and subtle control. By staying near you, they can track your movements, monitor your decisions, and anticipate your next steps. Their friendliness keeps suspicion low, which means boundaries stay relaxed. This is not accidental, it is strategic patience. What keeps them close longest is familiarity. When someone has shared history with you, their smile feels earned. You remember past support, shared laughter, or moments of vulnerability. These memories act as emotional shields, making it harder to question present behavior. Smiling enemies rely on this. They understand that familiarity delays discernment, and they use that delay to remain embedded in your space. Another reason smiling enemies stay close is that they benefit from your momentum. Your progress creates opportunities, visibility, or access they can indirectly leverage. Being associated with you enhances their position, even if they secretly resent your growth. This contradiction, benefiting from someone you envy, creates internal tension, which they manage by maintaining a pleasant exterior while quietly recalibrating their advantage. Smiling enemies also fear exposure. Distance raises questions. Silence invites reflection, but closeness allows them to manage narratives. They can explain away inconsistencies, soften suspicion, and redirect attention. The smile becomes a tool of reassurance, signaling safety while concealing intent. This is why they rarely initiate separation. You must be the one to notice the imbalance. Over time, this dynamic affects how you move. You become cautious without knowing why. You hesitate before sharing good news. You feel a subtle pressure to stay modest, restrained, or agreeable. This is not humility, it is self-containment learned in response to an environment that feels supportive but is not fully safe. Smiling enemies don't attack your confidence directly, they slowly teach you to limit it yourself. One of the most dangerous abilities of a smiling enemy is their influence over perception. They rarely confront you directly, but they quietly shape how others interpret you. Through tone, timing, and selective storytelling, they plant impressions that seem harmless on their own. A raised eyebrow, a casual comment, a well-timed concern. Because it's subtle, it doesn't feel like sabotage, it feels like conversation. And that is exactly how narratives begin to shift without resistance. Smiling enemies understand social dynamics deeply. They know that people trust those who appear calm, agreeable, and reasonable. So when they frame you as emotional, difficult, inconsistent, or overly ambitious, it lands softly. Not as accusation, but as suggestion. They never say enough to be questioned. They say just enough to be remembered. Over time, these impressions accumulate and you may feel misunderstood without knowing where the distortion began. What makes this especially effective is that smiling enemies often present themselves as neutral observers. They position their words as concern for harmony or fairness. I just want everyone to get along. I don't want to judge. This false neutrality gives their perspective credibility. Others don't see manipulation, they see balance. Meanwhile, you are left carrying the emotional weight of a story you never told. Another tactic is selective silence. Smiling enemies know when not to speak up for you. When your name comes up in a moment that matters, they stay quiet. They don't defend you, but they don't attack you either. This absence creates space for assumptions to grow. Silence, when expected support should exist, communicates more than words, and because nothing was said, no accountability can be demanded. Over time, you may notice that interactions feel subtly colder, less open or more cautious around you. People don't ask as many questions. Invitations shift. Trust feels conditional. This is often the result of quiet influence rather than overt conflict. Smiling enemies rarely need to destroy you directly. They simply allow misinterpretations to circulate while maintaining their own image as kind and reasonable. When smiling enemies influence perception around you, the effects eventually turn inward. You begin to sense a subtle disconnect between who you know yourself to be and how you are being received. Conversations feel slightly off. Responses feel measured. You may find yourself replaying interactions, wondering if you said something wrong or missed a cue. This internal questioning is not a flaw in your awareness. It is the consequence of existing in an environment where clarity has been quietly eroded. Smiling enemies thrive when self-trust weakens. They do not need to convince you of anything directly, they simply allow doubt to grow. When others respond to you differently, you may assume responsibility for the shift. You begin adjusting your tone, your openness, your expression, hoping to restore ease. In doing so, you move further away from your natural presence and closer to self-monitoring. This is how control happens without commands. Over time, this dynamic can create emotional fatigue. You feel the need to be careful rather than authentic. You choose restraint over expression, not because you lack confidence, but because the environment feels unpredictable. Smiling enemies do not demand your silence. They create conditions where silence feels safer. This quiet self-containment is often mistaken for maturity, when in reality it is a response to unseen pressure. One of the most damaging effects is the gradual separation from your intuition. When external signals contradict your internal knowing, you may start prioritizing appearances over instinct. You ignore subtle discomfort because nothing overtly wrong has happened. But intuition does not operate on proof, it operates on pattern. Smiling enemies rely on your willingness to override those patterns in order to remain reasonable and agreeable. This is why self-trust becomes essential. The more subtle the threat, the more important internal clarity becomes. You begin to notice who leaves you feeling grounded and who leaves you feeling unsettled. You stop explaining away tension. You stop assuming the misunderstanding is always your responsibility. This shift does not require confrontation. It requires honesty with yourself. Creating space from smiling enemies is not an act of hostility. It is an act of self-preservation. Once you recognize the pattern, you no longer feel the need to explain your distance. You stop forcing closeness where tension quietly exists. Conversations become lighter, shorter, and more intentional. This shift often happens without announcement, because safety does not require permission. Smiling enemies often react subtly when space begins to form. They may become more attentive for a short time, offering renewed warmth or sudden concern. This is not always manipulation, it is often fear of losing access. When proximity has been their advantage, distance threatens their sense of control, but consistency is key. When your boundaries remain steady without explanation or emotion, the dynamic changes permanently. Distance also removes their ability to gather information. When you stop sharing plans, doubts, and victories freely, their influence weakens. They no longer have material to reinterpret, repeat, or quietly reshape. This lack of access forces clarity. Those who valued connection for genuine reasons adjust naturally. Those who relied on access for leverage feel unsettled, and that reaction reveals more than words ever could. As space settles in, your energy begins to recover. You feel lighter, clearer, less guarded. Decision-making becomes easier because it is no longer clouded by subtle tension. You notice that peace returns not through confrontation but through alignment. You are no longer managing impressions or navigating unseen resistance. You are simply moving forward, unobstructed. Importantly, creating space does not mean isolation. It means selective presence. You invest your time and energy where transparency exists. You choose environments where support feels clean, not conditional. This discernment strengthens your confidence and reinforces your sense of self. You stop mistaking politeness for safety and start valuing consistency over charm. As space reshapes your interactions, relationships begin to reorganize themselves without force or confrontation. Some people drift naturally to the edges of your life, not because of conflict, but because access has changed. Where there was once constant communication, there is now distance. Where there was familiarity, there is now formality. This shift can feel unsettling at first, especially if you were conditioned to equate closeness with loyalty. But what is actually happening is refinement. Your life is making room for alignment. Smiling enemies often struggle during this phase because your withdrawal removes the role they once played. They were observers, intermediaries, quiet influencers. When that position disappears, discomfort surfaces. They may feel ignored, confused, or subtly displaced, not because you have harmed them, but because the dynamic no longer serves their hidden needs. Your silence speaks louder than confrontation ever could. This is also when clarity sharpens. Without constant exposure to subtle manipulation, your perception stabilizes. You begin to see past interactions more clearly, not with bitterness, but with understanding. Moments that once felt confusing now make sense. Patterns emerge. You realize that much of the tension you carried was not internal weakness, but environmental pressure. This realization restores confidence without resentment. As alignment deepens, your tolerance for performative connection fades. You become less interested in maintaining appearances and more invested in truth. Conversations that once drained you lose their pull. You stop explaining yourself to people who were never listening. This is not emotional detachment, it is discernment. You are choosing environments that support your clarity rather than erode it. Fewer connections often follow this stage, and that can feel like loss if you measure value by quantity. But what remains is stronger. Relationships feel cleaner, more reciprocal, and less ambiguous. Support no longer comes with undercurrents. You can relax into presence without guarding yourself. This is the difference between being surrounded and being supported. At this point, the danger of smiling enemies fades into the background, not because they no longer exist, but because they no longer have access. Your awareness has become your protection. You move forward without suspicion, without bitterness, and without the need to prove anything. When you finally understand that the most dangerous enemies are the ones who smile at you, something settles inside you. You stop looking for safety in appearances. You stop assuming that friendliness equals loyalty. Instead, you begin to value alignment over charm, consistency over politeness. This awareness doesn't make you suspicious, it makes you clear. You also release the need to expose or confront what was hidden. Smiling enemies thrive on reaction, confusion, and emotional engagement. When you move forward without bitterness or explanation, their influence dissolves naturally. You don't carry the burden of proving anything, you simply choose differently in the present. From this place, your presence changes. You become less reactive and more grounded. You listen more closely to how people make you feel rather than what they say. You notice ease where there is truth and tension where there is pretense. This sensitivity is not weakness, it is intelligence. The most powerful shift is internal. You stop personalizing betrayal that was never about you. You understand that smiling enemies act from insecurity, fear, or unresolved comparison. Their behavior reflects their inner state, not your worth. This realization frees you from carrying resentment. As you continue forward, your life feels quieter, cleaner, and more intentional. Relationships that remain are honest. Support feels steady. You no longer feel watched or managed. You feel free to expand without explanation. In the end, the greatest protection was never confrontation or exposure, it was awareness. The moment you stopped mistaking smiles for safety, you reclaimed your clarity. You learned to trust patterns over appearances and alignment over approval. And from that place, the most dangerous enemies lose their power, not because they disappeared, but because you no longer gave them access to who you are becoming.